clients best prepare for an uncertain future. Over the course of his career, Peter has worked for the US State Department, the DC think tank community, and helped develop the analytical models for Stratfor, one of the world's premier private intelligence companies. Peter founded his own firm, Zeihan on Geopolitics, in 2012 in order to provide a select group of clients with direct custom analytical products. Today, those clients represent a vast array of sectors including energy majors, financial institutions, business associations, agriculture interests, universities, and the US military. With a keen eye towards what will drive tomorrow's headlines, his irreverent approach transformed topics that are normally dense and heavy into accessible, relevant takeaways for audiences of all types. Peter is also a critically acclaimed author whose first two books, The Accidental Superpower and The Absent Superpower, have been recommended by Mitt Romney, Fareed Zakaria, and Anne Bremer. His latest third title, Disunited Nations, The Scramble for Power in an Ungoverned World, became available in March 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. And then after that, of course, we've had a few conversations with Peter about India, about the pandemic, about Asia, China, etc. And that brings us to what we want to start off with. To begin with, Peter, last time when on this very dais, when you said that the US is going to be withdrawing and it's going to be over the next few years retract its local presence across the globe in a substantial manner, and I was I really didn't fully take it. And when I asked you that why would they leave trillions of dollars of infrastructure in their place and just move out, you said they still will do it. And then Afghanistan happened, where in a matter of weeks, the US simply just walked out of that place, leaving most of us astounded. And then, we talked with each other, Mihir and me and all that. This is exactly what Peter said. So maybe Peter is advising those guys. So I wanted to talk to you about, from an Indian context, US's exit from Afghanistan has led to a sort of a vacuum for policing in a very, very troubled neighborhood for India. And then you have sort of a mentor state for the Taliban has been Pakistan with its ISI, and therefore there are very, very deep relationships that can sort of develop into something even more stronger between these two countries. Also, radicalism and the brand of nationalism and whatever have you that Taliban practices is quite infectious. And in a poor country like Pakistan, is there a possibility of actually, instead of Pakistan thinking that it is going to control Afghanistan, will it probably be the other way around and fuse into one giant AFPAC state, which becomes a trouble for India? There are also some writers in India who have sort of talked about another quad between China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and maybe an Iran coming together. And if such a thing happens, that can become a very, very potent military and very many other ways of threat to the Indian northwestern border. Of course, we also have the specter of the Pakistani bomb. So when we talk about India at 75 and India at 100 in 2047, in the next 25 years, next 5 years or 10 years, what are the possibilities of this kind of a scenario unfolding? Peter, over to you.
Well, I'm never going to tell Indians to not worry about Pakistan. It's your number one security threat. It always will be. The nuclear question is obviously can't be resolved quickly or easily, if ever. But for the rest of this, I'm really not too worried. The ISI propped up the Taliban and groups like the violence upticks in Syria and in Iraq. in Pakistan, and in Kashmir. So the threat here to India is not that there's going to be some sort of amalgamation of Pakistan and Afghanistan into some sort of Islamic superstate. The Pakistanis can't control it. The challenge is from Pakistan's weakness. The biggest risk to India right now is that Pakistan's internal inconsistencies under the Khan government just collapse the place under its own incompetence, and Pakistan falls into a period of kind of internal navel gazing where the question becomes who can duct tape this place together. And in that environment, the Haqqani network is going to be doing things in Kashmir without any sort of sponsorship from Islamabad. So there is a risk of greater violence to India, but not at the state level. And as long as Pakistan can hold on by the fingernails, the nuclear question is held at bay, at least for now.
Thanks, Peter. Now, that brings me to the second neighbor. I mean, of course, part of the same complex. But there is some very strange behavior that China has been exhibiting. I mean,
so strange, yes.
Yeah. And it's not just about the so-called Wuhan virus, which it was in the beginning, and then the U.S. Actions and reactions, and Trump and Biden, etc. Besides that, China is doing things that it has not really done for a long time. I mean, of course, starting with the Indian border skirmish, where people were actually killed. Then there are some very strong statements and actions which are happening between on the Taiwan front, and something very strange that we discussed while we were preparing for this is the notifications that several Chinese cities have been given by their government to stock up on essential supplies, food, bacon, army biscuits, etc., which they want to sort of explain it away as if it's a wintertime requirement. But winter has happened every year. This kind of notifications have not happened. And of course, then there is the sort of, they've been pursuing their billionaires, they've been pursuing their, superstar companies, and suddenly all of them, look like not so bright for the Chinese government. And this is a series of very weird behavior coming out of that place. What do you think is happening, and how do you think it will unfold?
The key thing to remember about the Chinese system in general is it's not like India, it's not like the United States, it's not like Britain, it's not like Australia. It's centrally planned. It's a fascist economic model. And so it takes a number of people, several dozen, probably several thousand actually, who are working in concert to a single goal to micromanage every aspect of the system. But for reasons financial and demographic and trade and populace, the economic model that the Chinese have been following has been failing for some time, and it's really on its last legs now. So Chairman Xi has come to the conclusion that the Chinese government can no longer guarantee economic growth, because if the Americans shut off the export markets, that goes away. If they have problems getting energy, everything goes away. So he's trying to convince the average Chinese citizen that it's not just about the economics, that it's about politics, that it's about nationalism. And so he's established a cult of personality so he can completely control that silo. That means that he has executed, imprisoned, intimidated into silence, or exiled everyone in the country who is capable of independent thought. And if anyone shows a degree of management competence that is perceived by the average Chinese citizen as to be equal or better than the Communist Party, that's a threat. That's why he's been going after the big companies. But it also means that he's shot the messenger, in some cases literally, so many times that he can't even get an accurate read of what's going on in his own country. And that's why we're getting these policy mismatches. That's why we had the electricity failures. That's why they're power rationing. That's probably where this guidance for stockpiling food has come from. That's certainly where the big nationalist decisions on Southwest Tibet or wolf warrior diplomacy or Hong Kong or Taiwan are coming from. And in this sort of environment, you can guarantee that when the guy at the top is making decisions all by himself with limited input, and no one is willing to tell the boss when, he might be wrong, he's going to make mistakes. He's going to make catastrophic, system-shattering mistakes. And so From our last talk, we talked about how the Chinese are facing a demographic collapse and an economic close down and an export collapse. We can now add incompetent leadership to the very top of that list. And in that sort of environment, I think of China as kind of now a cross between Pakistan and North Korea. One guy's in charge, making lots of mistakes, and the whole system is shaking apart.
That's quite scary. And you also made a point about India should not worry about a strong China, India should worry about a weak China.
Yeah. Now, from an Indian point of view, a weak China is not as dangerous as a weak Pakistan. The Himalayas are in the way, the jungles of Southeast Asia are in the way. If China implodes, historically speaking, it has imploded upon itself and had very limited impact on anyone who even borders it, much less is an ocean away. Pakistan's a bigger security threat in that regard because you actually do have a land bridge that's populated. But still, this is a country of over 1 billion people. This is the center weight of the global manufacturing system. The danger to India is not a security one, it's an economic one, because India, like many countries around the world, has not yet taken the steps necessary to become a major manufacturing power in its own right. We're all dependent upon the Chinese, and we can't unwind that in a day.
Okay. So then brings us down now from the west and north down to the south of India. We talk about the Indian Ocean. Two questions here. Well, there's a lot of action happening in the Indian Ocean from from basically two areas. One was the much talked about Quad, where I think two conferences have already happened. A physical conference has happened. And then in the middle of that, just before the last Quad meeting, there was a new development, which was the so-called AUKUS, Australia, UK, and US. And then there was the infamous, for the French, the submarine deal, which sort of came and put a spanner in the UK, in the French deal. So what is happening? I mean, is Indo-Pacific the new geopolitical center of the world? What does it mean for Australia to be armed with such sophisticated machinery? Is Quad therefore not really as important as I think some of us may have started imagining it to be, that there's four of us, India, Japan, and Australia and US are coming together to sort of patrol the southern Indo-Pacific, and we're going to be sort of part of this grand alliance of sophisticated economies and powers. So what does it say for India and for this region?
Well, let's deal with India last, because we need to put it all in context. So number one, the French. The French are not an Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean power. There was no way that in anything other than an American guaranteed global peace that the French could supply equipment over the long term to Australia. The French are not nearly as surprised that this deal fell through. They were more surprised when it happened in the first place. And so they were disappointed and offended, but they weren't really shocked. Second, Australia. Now, what's going on with the Australians is they have been going out of their way for quite literally decades to be the best friend of the United States that they can be. They were there in World War II, they were there in Korea, they were there in Vietnam, they were there in Iraq, they were there in Afghanistan. They have always been a creative, willing ally, and they have been lobbying Washington for decades to get the best weapon systems that they can. So from Canberra's point of view, this is the culmination of 80 years of foreign policy. And they're ecstatic. Everyone focuses on the submarines. And I don't mean to suggest that they're not important. But the real weapon system that matters here are the medium-range cruise missiles that the Australians will now have, which means that the Australians can now threaten Chinese shipping throughout the entire Malacca region. That puts Australia as one of only 4 countries in the world that can destroy China in a day. India, because it can interrupt the energy flows. Japan, because it has a better long-reach navy. The United States, of course, and now Australia. So here's a country of just over 30 million people that all of a sudden is punching 10 times above its weight. They're ecstatic. Third, the United States is retooling its alliance structure. We're done with Europe. Aside from the legacy bases in Germany, which honestly only exists still to support Middle Eastern operations, we don't have troops there anymore. So we only have a handful of allies that we're looking to maintain relationships with in the future. The United Kingdom, Australia, obviously, Japan, and Singapore. That's everything. Which brings us to India. The question is whether or not the Indians and the Americans can find a middle ground in their security concerns. Now, if you look at the big picture, the United States wants to prevent regional powers from being more than regional powers. India wants to be the dominant power of the Indian Ocean Basin, but it doesn't have ambitions beyond that. This is a perfect match. We just kind of have to get over one another's nationalistic imperatives here. That's totally doable. And the framework for the Quad is kind of perfect for that. It is not a military alliance. It is a conversation shop where the four powers bring their concerns together and they see if they can find some help from one of the other three to achieve their goals. It's a friendship forum which can possibly lead to an alliance. But considering where India is right now with its weapons technology, its ambitions, its problems with the Pakistanis, this is honestly a more realistic approach to any sort of long-term relationship building than an alliance would be. Because a real alliance, a direct alliance between Washington and India would mean that you'd have American troops in Kashmir. Do you want that? Because we don't. But if we have a situation where we can talk about things like Kashmir, talk about things like Islamabad, and bring in the Japanese for some economic strength and the Australians for that creativity that they always bring to every relationship, this is exactly what India needs right now. In many ways, this is better than an alliance.
Okay. Just a clarification for Indians from somebody sitting in the US and somebody who sort of understands. And I'm in the context of what happened last year, not last year, a few months back. US had blocked supplies of the vaccine, raw materials for some time. That's something that did not go very well with the public at large here.
Anywhere.
The whole... It
didn't go well anywhere.
Yeah. The friendship thing suddenly sort of looked like these guys can't be trusted. So what would you sort of...
America First is not simply the slogan of Donald Trump. It is the functional foreign policy of Joe Biden, and I really don't expect that to change in the next couple of presidents. The United States, like India, will always look out for its own interests first, and then if it is capable, it will look to its friends and allies for either assistance or to give assistance. That's just how foreign affairs work. But something that's critical to remember about this specific instance, the technology in question, the mRNA vaccine, there are very few facilities in the world that can process it. And at the time that this was going on, they were all in the United States. So even if the United States had provided the raw materials to someone else, it would have just sat in a warehouse. It couldn't have been turned into vaccine, which of course raises the question of what's next with the vaccines.
I get you. This is basically, why I'm saying this is, and again, you and I may not really be able to make a statement on this, but still, I'm airing what I'm thinking, and I think I was expecting, I am expecting your thoughts on this subject. India has a history. First of all, it fancies itself as one of the earliest civilizations, about 4,000 or 5,000 years old, there is historic evidence of that, and therefore we consider ourselves as a sort of a primal world power. Once upon a time, we were whatever. And then we have a very painful 300 years of colonial, period, because of which there is a sort of there is a, I wouldn't say a fear, or sort of an anxiety when it comes to dealing with other powers. And therefore, ever since we got independent for the last 75 years, we've always been wary of, getting into close friendships and alliances with world powers, whether it was the USA and USSR during the Cold War, and so on and so forth. So, for the first time, I think, in the last 20 years now, ever since the US supported nuclear raw materials. There was that embargo which was lifted, I think, around 2007 or 8. There has been a warming up and thawing of relationship between India and the US. And then, of course, there was the theatrics or the dramatics of the last president with our Prime Minister, where there was a lot of back-thumping camaraderie which was on camera. All that leads us to believe that things are getting better, and then suddenly this kind of a thing happens, and then you sort of the antenna goes up that we should really not trust these guys. That's all.
Sure. No, I totally get it. Let me do the same thing for Indians that I do for Americans. Let me give you some perspective. The reason that India did so poorly during the colonial period was that the British were industrialized and India was not. For 300 years, the British literally brought a gun to a knife fight. So of course it turned out the way that it did. But India is not unindustrialized anymore. Does the country have faults and shortcomings? Of course, we all do. But it is much closer to an even fight, and there is no industrialist power in the world that could impress its will upon India. India is here for good. That is not going to change. And the sooner that Indians kind of metabolize that fact and get the confidence that comes from it, from reality, I think the better off you'll be. Second, let's talk about India's vaccine record, because it is excellent. In less than 18 months, India has developed its own vaccine, the Covaxin formula, and applied it to hundreds of millions of its own people. There are only a handful of vaccines in the world that have managed to meet that time frame, most of which have come out of the cutting edge first world stuff. India's is the only one out of the developing world that has been successful and applied in mass. Now, is it as successful as protecting against the Delta variant as the Moderna or the Pfizer? No. But Pfizer and Moderna are a new technology, so I think that's the wrong measure. You got to compare it to your civilizational peers. Compare it to the compare it to the Chinese ones. You're probably 60 to 65% effective against Delta. That's more effective versus Delta than the Chinese vaccines were against the original strain. And the Chinese vaccines are useless against the Delta strain. So China has a zero tolerance policy, not out of safety, but because it doesn't have a choice, because it knows its vaccine doesn't work. So will India have another wave? Yeah, probably. Not enough people are vaccinated. And the natural immunity that you get from suffering through COVID only lasts a few months. So to think that you're over, I think that's overly optimistic, but your vaccine manufacturing capacity is ramping up week after week after week. It's a race. I don't know if you're going to beat it or not. But if you can get everybody vaccinated, the next wave will have a lot of cases, but not nearly as many deaths. And that'd be a huge plus. The Americans, we're in the same race right now as well. We're facing a lot more resistance than you guys are, because your vaccination strategies for the last 15 years have been far superior to most, not just in the developing world, but in the rich world as well. So if you keep that up, brilliant.
Yeah, I think we have very low numbers of vaccine skeptics here in India, unlike certain countries.
Oh, that's fantastic. And if you're looking for an opportunity here, if the Indian government can make an agreement with either Pfizer or Moderna, get the legal indemnity in place, and remember, well over 1.5 billion people have already gotten the Pfizer or the Moderna formulas, so that the safety issues are negligible. But if you can get domestic manufacturing of those vaccines established in India, that means the next wave of mRNA vaccines will be available for mass application. And we're not just talking here about new equivalents of the vaccines for polio or diphtheria or hepatitis. We're talking about vaccines for things like HIV and cancer. India has always had a problem maintaining a certain health level of its population. And if you can vaccinate against all of the diseases that have just been causing you problems for decades, can you imagine what's going to happen to economic growth on the backside of that?
That's very, very positive and nice to hear. I think my only one question that was remaining was, with Times Now, was working with some researchers in IITs, and some conversations I was part of, and this was about 5 or 6 months back, basically to understand where and how the third wave will come. And at that time, it was estimated that it will be this month, right now. The first week and second week of November was supposed to be the third wave peak. and it has not come, really. I mean, we really don't sort of see that happen. While the second wave was debilitating, and the third wave has not come, I'm sure, I mean, these are organisms, viruses, and they're not going to sort of just go away just because, you know. So what do you think are the chances, and approximately what do you think would be the time frame for the third wave for India over the next year? Any guess?
Let me give you two scenarios. Scenario one, I really can't keep to the timing because Delta's going to do what Delta does. But it's guaranteed and it will happen within a year. I can give you that much.
Within a year.
Until you achieve 90% vaccination versus Delta, this is just going to happen over and over and over. I honestly am a little surprised it hasn't started already, but give it 6 months and I'm sure it's going to be here. Second scenario, Delta is called Delta because it's the fourth variant. Coronavirus isn't done. As long as we have populations that are partially vaccinated, we are going to get new waves of new variants, and with each variant, the rules are going to change a degree. So Delta is about 3 times as communicable as the original strain out of China, which was 3 times as communicable as the flu. If you look at the evolutionary pressures that Delta is under now, it would be logical for it to develop a longer incubation period so it can spread better. And if that is what it does, that would delay a new wave a little bit. So I'm not overly shocked that it hasn't happened, but I think anyone who thinks we're not going to have another wave is silly. Now here in the United States, we're kind of in a lull because we're between summer, when a lot of people live in air conditioning and so are close together and can catch Delta, and winter, when a lot of people need heating and so they're close together and they can catch Delta. We're in autumn right now, so it's kind of like the magic moment. But I live in the Colorado Highlands. I live at just under 2,500 meters, and so it's already here, because here it's already winter. And so next month, it'll be all over the northern states, and then in January, it'll probably be all over the southern states again. We're not anywhere near done with this.
Thanks, Peter. I think that ends my questions. I can take 2 questions with the time that I have left quickly, if anybody wants to ask. Yeah.
I totally loved the level of authority and the lack of sugarcoating with which you very bluntly stated a bunch of things. So firstly, my compliments on that. Secondly, you gave your analysis about the Delta variant. And I mean, if you could just elaborate a little more, because does that mean that there will be lockdowns again? Does that mean that there are people who, out of a matter of principle, are not vaccinating? I know of a lady who closed the restaurant she ran rather than vaccinate her workers. And there are people like that, holdouts. So what do you think, I mean, is the future of COVID and of lockdowns and Delta variant, if I may ask?
Well, lockdowns are a political question to be decided by the political authorities, and in a federal system like India, that can be at the local level, that can be at the state level, that can be at the federal level, very similar to what we have here in the United States. And it'll be up to those authorities to decide if there is a lockdown and what sort of lockdown it will be. Now, that said, broadly speaking, I think we are done with lockdowns in most of the world. Some countries have had 3, even 6 lockdowns. The economic devastation from that is just not sustainable over a long period. Excuse me, COVID. Where was I? Oh, and an opening is just required at this point. So instead of getting broad-scale lockdowns, we might get facility lockdowns. Now, that's more disruptive to things like manufacturing than what we've done before. Because if you have a general lockdown, you can still keep the factories open because you know where the one case was. But now that we're opening because we have to, we're going to see a lot more outbreaks and a lot more local lockdowns, which is going to force a lot of us to do manufacturing in different ways and in different places. As for the holdouts, we have a lot of those here too. And so we've made the decision here at the federal government level to start mandating the vaccines in order to get past this. And at the pace we're going, the United States is likely to hit that 90% level sometime around next August or September. It shouldn't take this long. We should have been at this point in May of this year. But the United States is, how did Winston Churchill put it? You can always count on the Americans doing the right thing after they've exhausted all their possibilities. We're in one of those moments right now.
I think, thanks, Peter. We've run out of time, really, and the next guest would be here. Thank you very much, Peter. We'll see once again.
My pleasure.